Exposition. The exposition happens at the beginning of a story. This is where the characters are introduced to us, and then we also learn about the setting of the story. So remember that the setting is where and when the story takes place. For example, my story may take place in Chicago in the middle of winter, or my story may take place at school during lunch. Sometimes it'll tell you where, but not when, or vice versa. It'll tell you when. So it takes place in the 1700s, but it doesn't tell you where the story takes place. But just remember that that's what setting is. And then, most importantly, in the exposition, we are introduced to our main conflict, our main problem. So, remember, we talked about conflict, we talked about man versus man, or character versus character, character versus self, character versus nature, character versus society. So, we're in this exposition, which is at the beginning of our story, we're being introduced to the type of conflict or the main problem in the story. The next one is rising action. And this part of the story is where the conflict begins to grow. So we've been introduced to the conflict in the exposition, and now it's starting to grow and it builds up interest or suspense. So it's making you want to know more about it, or it's making you more interested in what the conflict is, where did it come from, and it makes the story more intriguing or interesting. And then the next part of plot diagram is climax. And this is the turning point in the story. So this is where the main character comes face to face with that conflict. So we've had this conflict kind of build up, and then we're at the climax, and now the character has to face this conflict, and how they face it can vary. So it may be a battle, it may be an argument, or a fight, or a talk, whatever that conflict is. That character is coming face to face with it, and then the main character usually will change in some sort of way. After that, the story starts to go down a little bit, so we have falling action, and this is when the conflict and the climax are taken care of. So that conflict is now being resolved and fixed, and everything's calming down, which leads us to our resolution, which is where the story comes to an end. So remember that when we're talking about plot diagram, it happens in order.